You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 286 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I am your host, Ben Eagle. My guest today is Tom Davis. We're in London today. Tom once went on the Radio 1 breakfast show with Greg James to talk about ducks. That gives you a rough flavour of some of the things we're going to be talking about today. He's currently farm manager at Mud Chute Farm, which is in the heart of London on the Isle of Dogs. He's a trustee of the British Waterfowl Association and the Poultry Club of Great Britain, and a former trustee of the Rare Breeds Survival Trust, where he served in that role for 8 years. He's also no stranger to the small screen, having appeared on a number of TV programmes to chat all things farming. Born and raised on a council estate in Battersea, he may not come from a traditional farming background, but he's been determined to follow a career in the sector and has previously managed another city farm and worked as an instructor at a college. He also judges sheep, poultry and waterfowl at various agricultural shows. And you can't see, listeners, but I can see behind Tom, there are many rosettes, so he's no stranger to the show circuit. Tom, welcome to Meet the Farmers. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's always a pleasure. If someone thinks that I might be interesting enough to fill some time and talk about what I get up to.
Well, personally, I think it's a good story, and certainly anyone, dare I say, anyone who gets into farming coming from Battersea, that's always of interest to me. So, I mean, perhaps let's go back to the beginning, and because you're not from a traditional farming background, so I'm interested sort of who and what inspired you, and sort of when was this in terms of where did your interest in farming start?
So always, we always had pets, dogs and, rabbits and guinea pigs and things like that, and even a tortoise or two in the early years. Basically, it was just filling the time with visiting my local city farm. And then when I was about 8 or 9, I decided that I wanted to help out on a visit and filled out the relevant forms. And then 2 weeks later, got a phone call to say that I can start. After my first day of volunteering, came home and told my dad that I wanted to be a farmer. It was then spending every spare minute that I had at the farm. It was closer to my dad's house. My dad lived walking distance from the farm. My mum in Battersea lived, it'd be about half an hour bus ride away. But all the holidays, any other weekends, any other weekend time that was spare, I was always there. That's where it started, really. Looking back on it, the years later, I was told by a very good friend of mine to always remember that a good stockman is born, they're never made. And I think that is no truer saying when you apply that to people that don't come conventionally from a farming background, but do have an affinity with animals and find their way into the industry. So also as well, my nan used to do a bit of cleaning in the latter part of her sort of working life. And one of the families that she worked for moved out onto a family farm down in Sussex.
Okay.
A place called Clapham Farm, and they farmed a few thousand sheep. They had about 1,500 cattle when I was there, beef cattle, and it was an arable farm as well, still going strong. And my nan used to take me down there conventionally sort of for Easter, because I'd sort of help out then with lambing. And they had the most fantastic shepherd who gave time to this kid from London who encouraged my enthusiasm and my want to learn, and overlooked maybe some of the mistakes that I would have made, like not knowing that I should have stood in that particular gap instinctively and having to be told to. And now there's 20 sheep behind me in a field that they shouldn't be in, And I think that's where some of my first proper farming memories come from is sitting, whether that be in the side of a tractor with their shepherd, Steve, or, on the back of a quad or something like that, and stopping, and he would tell me then about different birds and their songs, and we'd try and identify them as we went around, and yes, East Sussex is only a 45-minute train ride away from the middle of London, but it was a completely different world for me.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where it sort of sparked from. And then working and volunteering on my local city farm, that then consolidated it and confirmed for me that that's what I wanted to do when I grew up.
Hmm. That is a super inspiring story. I mean, even actually that shows just the story of that shepherd, how a little bit of time, a little bit of patience can make a huge difference. I'm sure he had no idea what you were going to go on to do eventually.
No, and
But
over the years, unfortunately, he's not here anymore. But I go back because he also then had a keen interest in poultry and waterfowl. He always kept a few chickens and ducks and stuff like that. And over the years, we've swapped different bits and pieces about, or I've gone and bought birds from him, and stuff like that. And I always remember one of the things that we did when we drove up to stay with our friends, when they came and picked us up and we drove to their house, we always passed the shepherd's cottage. And I always would look into the field directly opposite the cottage because that's where all the birds were, and see if he had anything new since the last time I came down. And then, couldn't wait to go and see him and stuff like that. And that was something that was there. But it, like you say, it shows you that if you are given the time and the opportunity by someone who is happy to help you, it can spark, or it can turn that little spark of enthusiasm into a roaring fire. And I've been very, very lucky over the years to meet some very inspirational people in this industry who have done it for their whole lives and who gave a kid from London some time, and it's pushed me on to do what I do and to carry on sharing and giving my time to people who may not come from a traditional farming background or route in, and to do the things that I've done as well.
Mm.
Because one of the key moments that made me more determined and made me want to get everywhere, or as many places as I possibly could, was being sat in my secondary school careers advice meeting, and the kids in my class going around each class and what they wanted to be. And, you had footballers and stuff like that. It wasn't in the day and age of reality TV, but I would imagine that a lot of them now would say they wanted to be on Love Island or something like this,
yeah.
Big Brother or whatever else like that. But, and I said I wanted to be a farmer, and they told me, don't be silly, Tom. You cannot be a farmer in London. You need to pick a different job. And that just made me more determined to prove them wrong. And, here I am.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the things I love about your story is that it's almost this full circle nature to it. And I mean, you have this very public facing role, and you've sort of carved a career so far through City Farm. So I mean, tell us a bit about your career journey and what's led you to managing Mud Chute.
So basically what happened when I went to college, now there wasn't any agricultural colleges in and around the outskirts of London. So I went to a college in Surrey near Epsom that did an animal management course. So I did a level 3 in animal management. Now, this was obviously, it makes me sound really old, but I'm not. It's just technology has come on so far. So when I left college, and I didn't have a computer at home during my college sort of years, so all of my assignments were all handwritten. So when I left college, I wrote letters to all of the city farms in London and said, my name's Tom Davis. I've got this level 3 in animal management. I've been volunteering at Dean City Farm for 9-10 years or whatever, however long it was. I'd be very happy to do any casual work that you'd have and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I sent that round to all of the city farms in London. There were 11 city farms. And out of that, then I ended up with 4 or 5 days a week covering holiday, sickness, stuff like that. And one of the places where I ended up, I don't know what it was that drew me to it, but it was Mud Chute. And I came and met the chairman of the trustees at that point, and he said, well, most of your time here will be voluntary because we don't have a lot of money, but we can pay you, I think it was something ridiculous like £30 a day.
Yeah. Okay.
And the rest of your time, that would take you up till lunchtime, and then the afternoon you'll be volunteering. And being from deepest, darkest southwest London, I'd never, ever been to the Isle of Dogs. I didn't know what it was. And this strange place where I was suddenly then opened up into 32 acres of farm, like open space and farm. And I just thought, wow. So I stayed and did that. And then a few years down the line, I was asked to be the farm manager because the farm manager left previously, and they advertised the job and they said, Tom, I think you should apply for it. We think you'd be quite good. I said, no, I don't think I have.
Oh, really?
I said, no, I don't think I have the right level of experience yet. I think I'm too young. So we just rattled on without a farm manager for a few months, maybe 6 months, something like that. And then they asked me again because they didn't really have any applicants that they really sort of were keen for. So then I applied for it and got the job. That was my first time as the farm manager here, was here up until 2009. And then I left here and went to work at a farm in Essex that was for kids that had been excluded from school. And it was their last resort before permanent. Well, basically, and it sounds really strange to say this, but before the education system says there is nothing we can do for you, goodbye,
Okay.
and that was eye-opening, dealing with such a range of children with different needs, mainly behavioural. Then was there for a while and then moved from there back into London to manage Vauxhall City Farm. Fantastic little place just opposite Vauxhall train station. You wouldn't know as you come out of Waterloo that there's a city farm.
I had no idea there was a city farm there, actually. And I know a lot of city farms, but I didn't know that one.
Yeah, so that's just tucked away just opposite Vauxhall train station on the other side of. So you go one side, you've got the River Thames. On the opposite side, you've got Vauxhall City Farm.
Okay.
And then was there for a while. I'd started showing by this point, so we'd started going to a few shows showing that we had at that point we had black Wensleydale and white-faced woodland sheep, and we only had half a dozen ewes, 3 of each breed. Went to Hatfield show, so that was at Hatfield House. We went there a couple of years on the trot, and the second time we was there, I got told that the estate was thinking about setting up a farm park, and the job was going to be advertised and that I should really look at it. So I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I didn't think that I would ever get the job. But I applied for the job, and lo and behold, I became the inaugural farm manager for the farm park that was at Hatfield House.
I'm sensing a theme here of you sort of saying, I don't think I'm going to get this. And then it happens.
Well, I think the thing is with all of the things that I've done, there's always been quite a high level of imposter syndrome, because I think any person will question their own abilities, and you find yourselves in situations where you don't think that you're able to do that. But anyway, there I was, and we had 6 months to turn a 25-acre field with 2 oak trees in it into a fully functioning, open to the public farm park.
Wow.
Which is exactly what we did. it was a fantastic place to work, a beautiful setting. And still to this day, unfortunately, the farm park isn't there anymore. But still, if I see Lord and Lady Salisbury around and about on the show circuits, it's still good to see them and have a good chat with them and catch up and find out how they are. After working at Hatfield, I then went to Capel Manor College as a practical instructor. So basically someone that looks after the animal collection and does or teaches all the practical side of the qualifications. Also did quite a bit of sort of lecturing, cover lecturing from level 1s up to level 3s. And then I became a little bit disillusioned with the sort of education system. The unfortunate thing that I found is it was sort of starting to become more for bums on seats than it was for that sort of situation, but I loved the teaching. It is something that I do miss, because I think in my lifetime, I've had some very good teachers, not only in the college environment, but also outside of that.
Yep.
And if you have a good teacher or someone that takes their time to put effort into you and helping you, it makes all the difference, and that's what I hoped I did to the students that I taught whilst I was at college. Some of the ones that I did teach are now managing animal collections around the country and doing various different bits and pieces, which is good to see. And then that brings me back to here. 2016, the farm manager position came up at Mud Chute, and I thought to myself, something about that place, and here I am.
Yeah, full circle, it brings you back.
Yeah.
I mean, Mud Chute is, by its very nature, I suppose, just the location. It's a pretty unique place. Tell us a little bit about Mud Chute, what you've got going on, but also, its place on the Isle of Dogs, and maybe anyone who doesn't know the Isle of Dogs, take yourself back to your younger self when you didn't know. What does the Isle of Dogs look like? What is there?
So,
and why is it strange in some ways for Mud Chute Farm to be there?
So if you, for any people that are listening, avid watchers of EastEnders, you can see the farm on there, because there's a strange bit of the map where the River Thames does a big loop.
It's the bendy bit, isn't it?
Back onto itself, and in the middle of that bendy bit, the island basically what would be an island in the middle of that, there's two big green patches. The biggest patch is Mud Chute.
Oh, that's Mud Chute.
And
okay.
The second patch is a park called Millwall Park, which we border.
Yeah.
So we're right in the heart of East London. And one of the areas that people may not know, or that may recognise more than knowing the Isle of Dogs, is Canary Wharf. So it depends who you talk to as to what area they call it. If you talk to local people, they will call it the Isle of Dogs. If you talk to people that work here or that have moved into some of the big penthouses on the riverfront, it's called Docklands, London.
Yeah,
Docklands.
Of course.
Now, Mud Chute was set up in 1977. All the city farms in London were set up between 1972 and 1977 on derelict patches of ground in and around London. The first one being Kentish Town City Farm in 1972, and a majority of the others were all set up then in 1977. And, it was a progression on from people squatting derelict dwellings on derelict land, growing a few vegetables and, sitting around a fire and playing a guitar. It was the 70s after all, and then keeping a few animals and stuff like that. Then they progressed really into keeping other livestock, and then inviting schools and groups and stuff like that to come and see them and stuff like that and all that kind of stuff. And then when they were threatened with development, there was a lot of fuss kicked up about protecting them and how important they were. And there used to be 16 city farms in London. Now there's 11. And it's mainly due to the pressure of building and land value that they've gone. And some councils have sort of bowed out and said, well, the land is too valuable for us to do that. But so Mud Chute was set up in 1977. It's got its name from when the big docks were being dug. So back when the docks were working around here and there was great big ships coming in, bringing tea and spices and everything else like that, they had to keep the docks clear for the big ships. So they had to dredge them and take all the silt and mud out. And they pumped that to a big area of waste ground through great big chutes, which happened to be here. So that is how it got its name, the Mud Chute, because it was where all the spoil from the docks was pumped and dumped. A lot of it, because it was very fertile, ended up being exported to Holland for them to grow the bulbs in. So a lot of the tulips and daffodil bulbs in Holland were originally grown in soil from the dredgings of the docks here in London. Once Mud Chute was actually threatened with development, and the people that worked here at that, or helped out the local people at that moment in time, then took a flock of sheep and a hive full of bees to the council offices and let them go. And it's surprising what that kind of protest back in those days did, because it got them no prison time as far as I'm aware, but it got them 32 acres of prime land on a peppercorn rent under the covenant that it should remain open, public open space for as long as, initially in their eyes for perpetuity. But,
amazing how things change.
Exactly. And fast forward to now, and we are London's only rare breeds approved conservation centre, keeping a range of native breeds, rare and native breeds of farm livestock, and trying to get people to realise that with every part of the UK generally comes a breed of sheep, cattle, goat, pig, chicken, or something like that. And their conservation is as important as some of the more standout exotic species that we rave about in the world.
What are some of the biggest challenges of managing a city farm? I mean, other than, dare I say, the F word, funding, which I'm sure is for everyone, but that must be a challenge.
Yeah, it is. It is massively so. And, because it's surprising, really, in a day and age where you'd think people would like to know where their food comes from and more about provenance and story. They don't want to fund a farmer's post. If we were to write a bid saying, can you fund the farm manager's position? He's going to manage the farm, the animals, the people that work in it, and make sure that visitors have a great time when they come and learn about food and farming. No. What we have to say is, would you like to fund the farm manager's post? The farm manager facilitates various different adults and young people from cultural, ethnic backgrounds, from all different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, using the animals as an educational tool to teach them about the natural environment. When you start to, if you're writing funding bids, you have to start using all the buzzwords.
Yeah.
And the money is getting harder to get. For smaller amounts of money now, you're having to do lots of quarterly monitoring. You're having to do all the form filling out and stuff like that. Say, for example, you do the same level of monitoring for £2,000 as you might do for £25,000, so it's becoming harder, but those pots of money are becoming more difficult to get and more difficult to find. So you're always constantly thinking about new ways to do bits and pieces, new ways to bring income in and to try and, in effect, diversify. I mean, one of the things that one of the unique things about Mud Chute is the main site is open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. People can access it. It's public open space, so people can walk through it pretty much all the time. There's only certain areas that are locked off and everything like that. But if it was fenced off and secure, one of the first things that I'd probably do would be to put some glamping pods on here, because who wouldn't want to stay on a farm environment? Who wouldn't want to stay on a farm environment whilst they're going to see someone in the O2 that evening.
Yeah, exactly.
Wake up with sheep and cattle around you, and then jump on the Jubilee line and shoot over to the O2 to watch who's there at the moment. Sabrina Carpenter, I think. So you could do that, not a problem.
How do you think local people see the farm? Do you think they feel a sort of ownership over it?
I think one of the things is as well is yes, they do. It's part of a lot of the older generation. It's part of their cultural sort of heritage, really. They grew up coming over to the Mud Chute when the parents told them not to go, when it was more derelict and not as visitor friendly. The demographic that we have here at the farm is vast, with visitors from all different backgrounds. And, one of the most difficult things to do is to try and cater for all of the people that live on the Isle of Dogs, because like I mentioned earlier on, you've got these big, massive, millions and millions of pound penthouses dotted around the edge on the banks of the River Thames. You've then got all of the estates in the centre of the Isle of Dogs, the council housing and stuff like that, what we always aim to do here is create a fun, free and educational day out for everybody. Some of the things that we will charge for minimal charges for selling bags of animal food, for animal petting, donkey ride, stuff like that, But yeah, it's all a challenge. And, going back to your previous question about challenges, what challenges? Well, one of the biggest ones is a vehicle, because, you'd think being a farm, we'd have a truck or van or something like that to tow a trailer. But because of the changes in ULEZ,
oh, really?
we're in the
Wow.
ULEZ zone. So
Of course.
a compliant pickup truck in London will be over 25 grand. So at this present moment in time, we don't have a vehicle to tow our trailer to move stock around and about. So, we either have to beg, borrow and steal vehicles or pay out for hauliers to take stuff to and from where we need it gone. So it's because we don't have the money in our budgets to buy a vehicle, and to buy a compliant vehicle is a lot of money. But also as well, that additional ULEZ charge now has been put on the bills for our farrier, our feed merchants, our vets, everyone that has to come in to supply what we do here and to help a livestock farm run, have all had to pass that cost on to us in order for them to keep running.
Yeah. And even, dare I say, even if I'm assuming you were, say, donated a truck, just the ongoing cost just doesn't justify it anyway, does it?
Well, one of the things that we look to do is to sort of things like mobile farms and stuff like that, taking animals out to schools and
of course,
people's homes and stuff like that. So we would obviously generate income from that, which would then potentially help towards covering the costs of the running costs of a vehicle. But yeah, that's just one of the challenges that I sort of plucked out there.
Let's turn towards judging and that side of your life. How did you get into judging livestock at ag shows?
I got into showing was the first way that I got into it. In my first stint here as the farm manager, we went to buy, they wanted some, like the powers that be, my directors, wanted some donkeys. So I found some donkeys for sale in Essex, went to the farm to have a look at these donkeys, lovely donkeys. Happened to mention to the husband and wife team that were there, that owned the farm, that I was in the market for a different breed of sheep. At that moment in time, Mud Chute had Oxford Down sheep, was the main breed, biggest of the downland sheep.
I was going to say, huge sheep.
Yep, for those people that don't know them, they are a black-headed, a sort of face sheep with black legs and a big white fleece and then huge, great big stereotypical downland sort of fluffy face, with the adult ewe sort of weighing about 90 kilos starting, really. So I wanted something to completely contrast that. And I said that I'd been thinking of a rare breed, and the man's name was Jeff Wild. And he just so happened to have been the retiring chairman of the White-Faced Woodland Sheep Society.
Okay.
Now, he didn't keep white-faced woodland sheep at that moment in time, but he would put me in touch with the lady who dispersed, who he sold his flock to. Now, I couldn't drive then. So 2 weeks later, I found myself getting the train out to Chelmsford to meet Jeff, who was waiting for me outside the Chelmsford train station with his Land Rover and an Ifor Williams trailer. And we drove then up to Suffolk
Okay.
to a lady called Jo Taylor. And we bought 6 white-faced woodland sheep in lamb shearing ewes. And they came back to Mud Chute. Now, what happened after that and those conversations that I'd had with Jeff and his wife, Bryony, was the start of a very, very good friendship. And that friendship was also me learning, because at that moment in time, the livestock that Jeff kept were a pedigree herd of English longhorn cattle. And he said to me, we was very, he could tell that I was keen, and I couldn't believe first time I seen longhorn cattle this close. They were absolutely stunning. And he said to me, well, if you want to, come back up in the summer and you can come and help me show them.
Right.
And yeah, I spent then quite a few years after that traveling around with Jeff and his wife Bryony, showing English longhorns at various different shows in and around East Anglia and the southeast. So Suffolk was the main show that we went to. Also went to Kent County Tendring 100 show, showing the longhorns. And, also as well alongside that, even though they were both retired from their professional lives, they then ran a donkey ride business too. So the Suffolk show, for example, I would help Jeff showing the longhorns, and my sister would then help Bryony with the donkey ride business. And Jeff was a judge himself of cattle and sheep, listening to him with all the stories that he had, growing up in Derbyshire and farming around there, and how he'd seen farming change. There was a lot of information. The whole time he spoke, it was like I was like a sponge, taking all this information in and asking him different things. Well, how did you do this? And what would you look for with this? And he said to me when I started with the white-faced woodlands, he said, Tom, you need to remember a few things. White-faced woodlands are known for being bad in the mouth and bad on their pasterns. He said, so those are things that you need to concentrate on. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Then also as well, just flicking through sort of characters that helped me. Now, sadly, Jeff isn't here no more, and he made it into I think he was had a hell of a good life and made it to a good old age. There's another man who is the reason that I've got Norfolk horn sheep, a man called David Walton, and he saw me showing the sheep at Hatfield show. He was the judge, the Hill and Heath section judge, and we was judging the white-faced woodlands there. He couldn't believe, and he said to me, I can't believe quality of this animal, and you're telling me that it's born and raised in London. I said, yeah, that's it, 100%. We ended up that day being reserve interbreed champion with that white-faced woodland ewe. After that, David, who lived in Preston in Lancashire, came down to London to see Vauxhall City Farm for himself and couldn't believe it. That then was the start of that friendship too, and used to speak to David regularly on the phone, see him then when we started showing around and about, sort of creeping out from shows like Surrey County, obviously local to us in London and places like that. Then and Hatfield, when we ventured out further to some of the more northern shows, then David would be featuring as a judge or showing Norfolk horns a lot too. And one day my phone rang and David said to me, Tom, we're putting on a show at Stoneleigh Park in Warwickshire, and I'd like you to judge some classes. And I said, what are you talking about? I can't judge any sheep. Don't know what I'm doing. And he said, well,
there you are again.
Saying
the same thing.
He said, you've been consistent in your placings and where you've been with the quality of stock that you've been turning out. I'd like you to to come and judge. So I did, and apparently didn't upset too many people and made some good choices. And it just then progressed on from there. The year after that, it wasn't the Royal Cheshire Show then, but the Cheshire Show phoned me and said, would you like to come and judge the Rare Breed Championship? And I said, okay. I said, but how did you get my number or my contact there? I said, oh, a good friend of the show, a man called David Walton.
Ah.
So I spent a lot of my sort of early judging years judging shows around the Northern Circuit, thanks to David and his belief in my abilities, judging at Garstang and places like this. And, one weekend I double booked myself and was judging rare breed sheep at Garstang Show on the Saturday in Lancashire, and was judging waterfowl on the Sunday down at Wayland Show in Norfolk.
Oh my goodness.
On the Sunday. So,
living in Norfolk as well, and I know what any journey like that is like. That's quite a journey.
My better half, I will say that, has put up with a lot over the years, and she came with me on that mammoth journey. We drove up to Lancashire on the Friday night and stayed with some fantastic friends of ours who breed and show some brilliant large black pigs, Jack and Jane Holroyd. Stayed with them, went to the show on the Saturday, judged the sheep, then travelled down after we had our lunch down to Norfolk and stayed overnight there, and then judged the show on the Sunday. So it then sort of picked up momentum. And I think one of the things that does happen is if you are a new judge, especially a younger judge on the circuit, and, I'd kept most of the breeds of sheep on the watch list and I had experience of that and everything like that. So, then when we started doing all of that, I was getting phone calls to judge various different breeds, like breed classes rather than any other natives and stuff like that. And it just progressed on and still does. So, over the last few years, I've been put on to the list of breed judges for Cotswold sheep. All different breeds. Oxford Downs have asked me to be a breed judge. But I think one of the biggest sort of judging engagements that I've had to date was judging all of the any other breed classes and the whiteface woodland breed classes at the Great Yorkshire Show. That worked out to be nearly 8.5 hours of sheep judging.
Oh my goodness.
And that's jumping from the primitive section, so judging things like Soays and Borerays, which I forgot to, to add that in. I'm the vice chair of the Soay and Boré Sheep Society at the moment. So judging those primitive breeds like that, and then moving on to any other downland breeds, judging Oxford Downs and Hampshire, South Downs and things like that. Then the long walls, and constantly you're having to change and remember the breed standard in your head for those different breeds that you're judging, as well as it being a good sheep. And then at the latter part of that day, judging the whiteface woodland sheep breed classes. Now, this is a breed that I've kept for a while. One of the first big, like one of their flagship shows, judging the breed in its home region. You think to yourself, Christ, you don't want to make the wrong decision here, Tom. You never get invited back. And that was a very nerve-wracking sort of set of judging the classes there. But I picked the sheep that I liked, the sheep that I thought, through my interpretation, was the best example of its breed. And when we finished, everyone seemed happy enough. And the next thing I know, some of the other exhibitors that were judging underneath me, came rushing down the lines with a glass of champagne for me and said, Tom, you've done a fantastic job. Come and have a drink with us.
Relief.
So it is, and it's one of them things that it's an honour and a privilege, I feel, to be asked to judge any livestock classes. And since then, it started with sheep and then waterfowl and poultry, but since then I've judged pigs. I judged pigs over in Northern Ireland at Gosford Park Rare Breeds Show and Sale, and latterly last year judged my first competitive cattle classes of Dexter's at Cranley Show. So, it's the one thing for me that I've always been quite geeky on is learning the finer points of breeds, which I think has helped
Yeah.
in the judging. And through the showing, and I've met some fantastic people that have become superb friends. And it was through, like I said, with David, he had Norfolk horns and was always on at me to have Norfolk horns. Tom, you need to have some Norfolks. Tom, you need to have some Norfolks. I'll give you some Norfolks. They're fantastic sheep. And I was like, no, I don't need any more sheep. I've got enough breeds. I don't need any more. Now, unfortunately, David isn't no longer here with us, and he'd gone too young and too early, but his sons and his wife got in contact with me and asked me, we don't really want to keep the sheep anymore, but we want them to go to someone that's going to carry on David's hard work and the time that he put into them. So I ended up with a ram and 4 ewes, and that's how I've still got Norfolks, and I've had Norfolks for a good number of years now, but that's how I got into them. And this coming year, I've been asked to judge the Norfolk Horn breed classes at the Royal Norfolk Show.
Oh, fantastic.
So
I will see you there.
You will. And what a lovely show that is. And they look after the judges fantastically well. I mean, and that's, a lot of the shows do look after the judges very well. And without the livestock exhibitors, the main attraction of the shows wouldn't be there, because people go to see the livestock. And that's, that's really, in a nutshell, how I got into judging.
Amazing story. Oh my goodness, there are so many things, Tom, that I want to ask you, but time is against us. But before we wrap up, I wondered if you had a comment on whether you think farmers and rural communities, I suppose, need to do more to engage with urban audiences. This is a subject that's talked about quite a lot, but if so, what could they do? There's obviously the Clarkson factor, which has happened, but I mean, for someone who is actually literally in an urban area talking with people on the ground, I don't know. Have you got any advice for farmers in more rural areas?
What I was actually going to apologise for is the background noise, because I'm sat in my office and we've just had 60 kids just come round, because my office is next to our animal contact area. So they've come round to feed some goats. But there is currently 60 children from a school, wherever that may be in London, that have come to the farm. So we've had about 120 kids here today. Mud Chute is free for people to get into, as are all city farms, and we see around 120,000 visitors a year.
Amazing.
45,500 of those are school-aged children. One of the things that I see city farms doing, and what we should be doing, is trying to bridge the gap between town and country and educate people about high welfare, extensive food production in the UK. We're at a day and age, up until sort of fairly recently, there was a massive split with people saying that, you shouldn't be rearing livestock for eating, it's damaging the planet and stuff like that. And generally, most of the time when we went through a phase of, if we posted pictures of lambs or things like that on our social media, that we would be berated with comments about, I can't believe that you send them to the abattoir and you eat these poor little creatures and all this kind of stuff. But then a lot of the people that would be tapping out those complaints as their sort of keyboard warriors, are probably sipping on a soya milk latte after just having eaten some avocados on sourdough toast. If you're going to talk about farmers and say that we shouldn't be rearing, livestock in the UK for eating in one of the best, highest welfare farming industries in the world, yet we should be looking at sort of, you're saying that to us, eating food that is out of season, that cannot be grown here in the UK, and you're worried about the planet. It doesn't really work out, does it? What I say to people here is, as a livestock farmer, I want people to eat less meat but of a better quality. And the things that will save the planet is not necessarily planting trees, because it's all about the right tree in the right place, but is it eating what will save the planet is eating food seasonally, locally, and ensuring the food that we eat here in the UK is British, because you can't come and tell me that I'm doing a bad job for the environment when I'm eating a lamb that is produced here and does 80 food miles, when you're eating avocados and drinking soy milk. And those two products can't really be grown successfully here in the UK in any great quantity. If you're that concerned about the planet, you would eat food that is seasonal and local. One of the things for me, and I see it a lot here, is the disconnect between food that people eat and them. The consumer it's gone. There's no link there at all whatsoever, and it's crazy. We had a farm tour last week, and I asked the children what we get from goats and why farmers keep goats, and one of them put their hand up, and when their hand's going up that much that you think they're going to have a hernia or something like that, it's got a bit of damage. So I said, yeah, why do we keep goats? And they said, I said, what do we get from goats? And they said, crisps.
Okay. What's the logic there?
I don't know. But these sorts of answers,
Wow.
and then I've had adults visit before, because we've got some llamas here. And one of the parents of one of the children asked, can I ask a question? Yeah, absolutely. Where's the other head? And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, the other head, like in Dr. Dolittle, the push me, pull you. And I said, well, actually, we're a registered charity, and when we went to buy them, we couldn't afford them, so we had them cut in half. And this is a parent of a child actually believed that was a plausible answer. But then when I realised they was being serious, I thought, well, we've got to stop being so sarcastic.
Wow.
And I said, well, think about it like this logically. How would that animal reproduce? How would that animal go to the toilet? And they genuinely said, well, I hadn't thought about that. And when you hear things like that, when you experience those things firsthand, you realise that something does have to be done to educate people about food and farming. And I'm happy, I've said it on more than one occasion, I think that some of the big agricultural organisations should be tapping into places like us to get that message out there. There was a quite a few years ago now, linked to sort of local NFU branches. It was the food and farming, the year of food and farming, and I took some kids down to the Friends Farm in Sussex to see through the course of the year what happens on the farm. So they saw it in spring, summer, autumn, winter, to get used to that sort of cycle, and I think things like that are better. And, you've got farmers in schools and stuff like that. It's really good, but there needs to be more about it. And I am a firm believer in that agriculture should be taught in secondary schools more, or at least about it, because people need to have that knowledge as to where their food comes from. And the unfortunate thing is now we live in a day and age where people can edit and make AI videos on whatever they want, and they can be realistic, they can be believable, and for people that don't know, they could be the fact that they believe, and that is a problem. There's been some big campaigns put out there about sheep shearing and celebrities holding lambs that look like they've been ripped to shreds, but in actual fact, they couldn't find a lamb with bad enough injuries, so they made a papier-mâché model to depict that, which is crazy. So I think that there needs to be the reconnection with food, the revalue of food. We live in such a fast throwaway for society. People don't value the food that they eat. It's always there. It's always in supermarkets. During COVID, obviously, that pushed people to think about food a bit more and go to farm shops and local suppliers and producers. And we've just set up a farm shop here selling meat directly that we produce here to the public,
So great.
We're hoping that goes on. And that's one of the many ways that we've tried to consolidate and focus that message that we get out there.
If there's anyone from any of the ag associations listening who fancies collaborating with Tom in some way, please do get in touch. We're unfortunately going to have to start to round up, but yeah, there are, like I say, there are about at least. I'm looking through my list. There's at least a dozen topics that I wanted to talk about with you. So I might have to ask you one for a future show, Tom. But before we go, I wonder if I can ask you the questions that I ask everyone when they come on the show, just to finish us off. If you had a message for the public, any message, and I know you engage with them every day, what would be your message to the public?
I think it's exactly sort of what I touched on there, and it is valuing what we eat and the people that produce it. It's a very heightened topic at the moment, with the farm inheritance tax and everything like that. And, even though it isn't something that would affect me directly, I'm in the industry and I was at the first protest in London, because as an industry, we need to show that unity and that support for each other. And I have to say, it was probably one of the most enjoyable tube journeys I've ever had in London, being surrounded by people that work in the same job as me
I know it must have been that must have
and
been a
talking
first,
to
was it?
them. Whereas usually I'm surrounded by people in suits that are looking at me like I've sort of escaped out of some kind of institution and haven't taken the right amount of medication. But the message to the public is support and back British farming, because without British farmers, we will have no food security as a nation. We will have no food to be proud of. And British farmers, along with farmers, I think British farmers are some of the hardest working, people around the world. One of the highest standards of welfare, animal welfare throughout the whole of the world. Working 365 days a year for next to nothing to feed other people. It is something that is underrated and under celebrated, and I think it's something that needs to be done. So, you need to make sure that you eat seasonally, eat locally, and buy British.
And your message to your fellow farmers.
Carry on. You've got to keep on keeping on. And, there's a lot of stuff around and about at the moment talking about, farmers and struggling and stuff like that. And it's making sure that you do speak to each other and speak to that friend that you didn't get I'll ring them and, I didn't get time, we were busy lambing sheep or whatever else like that, whatever. Just make sure that you've got that time to have a chat and have a cup of tea. But, no matter how much you worry about things, you just got to lean on the people around you and carry on doing what you love. And, farming is one of the hardest jobs in the world, but probably one of the most rewarding. And I may not be a person that does it as a livelihood. So the sale of my lambs doesn't impact my wage, but I feel like I'm part of the industry, and, so keep on doing what you're doing. And that's it really. You do a fantastic job every day of the year.
Yeah, so I was sensing there's a bit of that imposter syndrome coming through again, Tom. You're definitely a farmer. You're a worthy part of the podcast. We will leave it there, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure and just fascinating listening to your story. So thank you.
No worries. Not a problem at all.
That's it. We'll leave it there. A big thank you to my guest, Tom Davis, for coming on the show. Thank you also for listening. Next time we'll be in Wales. I'll be speaking with James Raw. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.